Some things should never be found. March 1932. The crew from the Oregon State Highway Commission was pushing through the dense forest east of Portland, clearing the way for the new rural road that would connect the city to the isolated villages inland. The sound of electric saws tore through the wet silence of the woods when suddenly the machines stopped. In the middle of nowhere, miles from any known trail, stood a wooden house. It wasn't an abandoned cabin. It wasn't a ruin overtaken by moss. It was a solid, recent construction with an intact roof and clean glass windows. As if someone had simply placed it there. The men looked at each other. No one knew about this house. No municipal map registered it. No local resident had ever mentioned its existence. The foreman, a pragmatic man named Robert Finch, knocked on the door. Nothing. He pushed the handle, and it gave way. What they found inside froze everyone's blood. The house was furnished. Chairs around the table, plates still on the embroidered tablecloth, clothes hanging in the wardrobe, as if someone had stepped out for a few minutes and would return at any moment. But there was something profoundly wrong. The clothes were in old styles, decades old. The portraits on the wall showed serious faces, people dressed for funerals, and below each portrait, small bronze plaques with names and death dates, all dead. All buried in Portland's municipal cemetery. When they checked the property records for the region, they discovered something even more impossible. The name on the land ownership document. Harold Voss was the same one that had been signing burial certificates at the local cemetery since 1928. But Harold Voss never existed. There was no birth certificate, no address, no photograph, only his signature, repeated on dozens of documents. Always the same perfect handwriting, as if written by the same hand, that never trembled, never aged, never stopped. To understand who or what built that house in the middle of the forest, we need to go back to the winter of 1928, when the first bodies began to disappear from Lone Fir Cemetery, Portland, Oregon. Winter of 1928. The city was drowning in rain and economic despair. The stock market hadn't crashed yet, but the signs were everywhere. Factories closing, breadlines forming, families disappearing overnight. The wealthy neighborhoods on the hills still glowed with electric lights. But down in the industrial districts near the Willamette River, darkness was spreading like ink through water. Lone Fir Cemetery sat on the eastern edge of the city, a sprawling necropolis of weathered headstones and crooked iron gates that had been swallowing Portland's dead since 1855. By 1928, it was overcrowded, underfunded, and largely forgotten. The city had newer, cleaner cemeteries now. Lone Fir was where the poor ended up, the forgotten, the nameless. The cemetery keeper was a man named William Dorsey, 63 years old, arthritic hands, a face like carved driftwood. He'd worked there for 27 years and knew every grave, every name, every story buried beneath the wet Oregon soil. He kept meticulous records in leather-bound ledgers. Date of burial, plot number, name of the deceased, name of whoever signed for the interment. It was in December of 1928 that Dorsey noticed something strange. A signature he didn't recognize had begun appearing in the burial records. Harold Voss. The handwriting was immaculate, too perfect, almost mechanical. Voss had signed for 7 burials in 3 weeks. All paupers, all unclaimed bodies from the city morgue. Dorsey had never met the man, had never seen him attend a funeral, had never even heard his name mentioned by any of the funeral homes. But the signatures were there, legal, witnessed, stamped by the city clerk's office. And then, on a frozen morning in January 1929, Dorsey walked past plot 247B and stopped. The grave was empty, not robbed, not disturbed by animals, simply empty, as if the body had never been there at all, as if the earth itself had swallowed it whole and sealed itself back perfectly, leaving not even a trace of disturbance. The name on the burial record, signed by Harold Voss. Before we continue deeper into this story, I want to know something. Where are you listening to this from right now? Robert Finch had been a foreman for 11 years. He'd seen men crushed by falling trees, swallowed by mudslides, mangled by machinery. He didn't scare easily. But standing in the doorway of that house in the middle of the forest, he felt something he hadn't felt since childhood, the primal certainty that he was somewhere he shouldn't be. The air inside was wrong. Not stale, not musty. It smelled lived in, like someone had just cooked breakfast, like curtains had just been opened to let in morning light. But there was something underneath that smell, faint, sweet, cloying, like flowers left too long in a vase, like the air inside a funeral home after the mourners have gone. "Jesus Christ," muttered Eddie Torres, one of the younger workers, as he stepped inside behind Finch. "Who the hell lives out here?" "Nobody," Finch said quietly. "Nobody lives out here." The main room was small but meticulously arranged. A wooden table with 4 chairs. A cast-iron stove in the corner, cold but clean. Shelves lined with tin cups, plates, folded linens. Everything in its place. Everything too perfect. It reminded Finch of model homes he'd seen at county fairs. Houses staged to look real, but somehow emptier than abandoned buildings. Torres moved toward the mantelpiece above the stove, where 7 framed photographs stood in a neat row. Black and white. Formal poses. People in their Sunday best, staring into the camera with the stiff, uncomfortable expressions common to early photography. "Look at these dates," Torres said, leaning closer. Finch joined him. Below each photograph, small brass plaques had been carefully mounted. Margaret Hollis, 1891-1919. Samuel Kern, 1885-1923, Dorothy Mae Fisher. At CERN, 1902-1927, Peter Ashford, 1896. 1930, 4 more names. 4 more death dates. The most recent was less than 2 years ago. "These are memorial photos," Finch said. "The kind families keep after someone dies. Why would someone build a house out here just to display pictures of dead people?" Torres asked. Finch didn't answer. He was staring at the photographs themselves. Something about them felt off. The poses were too formal, too staged. These weren't casual family portraits. These were post-mortem photographs. A Victorian tradition where families would pose with their deceased loved ones one final time before burial. But in these photos, the dead were alone. No grieving family members, no flowers, just the body, positioned carefully, eyes closed, hands folded. Captured forever in that liminal moment between person and corpse. "Check the other rooms," Finch said. There were 3 small bedrooms leading off the main room. Torres took the first. Another worker, a man named Jack Howell, took the second. Finch pushed open the door to the third. The room was identical to what he imagined the others looked like. A single narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, pulled tight, military crisp. A nightstand with an oil lamp. A wooden chair. And on the wall above the bed, another photograph. But this one was different. The person in the photo was alive. Clearly alive. A man, perhaps 40 years old, with hollow cheeks and intense eyes that seemed to follow Finch as he moved. He wore a dark suit and held a Bible in his left hand. Below the photo, a brass plaque read, "Harold Voss, caretaker of the departed, no birth date." No death date, just that title. Caretaker of the departed, boss. Torres's voice came from the other room, sharp with panic. "You need to see this." Finch found Torres standing in the middle of the second bedroom, staring at the floor. He was pale, breathing hard. He pointed to the space beneath the bed. Finch knelt down and looked. Shoes, 7 pairs of shoes, lined up in perfect order. Different sizes, different styles, men's brogues, women's Sunday heels, a child's leather boots, all polished, all waiting, as if their owners would return at any moment to put them on. Torres's voice was barely a whisper. "What kind of person collects dead people's shoes?" Finch stood slowly, his knees cracking. He looked around the room again, the bed, the chair, the photograph on the wall, and felt the temperature drop. Not physically, but somewhere deeper, in his gut, in his bones. "We need to contact the city," Finch said. "We need to contact the police, and we need to find out who the hell Harold Voss is." But even as he said it, he knew they wouldn't find him, because men like Harold Voss don't get found, they do the finding. The Portland Police Department sent Detective Arthur Brennan to the site 3 days later. Brennan was a methodical man, 52 years old, 26 years on the force, with a face that had seen too many suicides and not enough justice. He arrived with a notebook, a camera, and a profound skepticism about anything that couldn't be explained by greed, jealousy, or stupidity. The house changed his mind. "You touched anything?" he asked Finch. "Just what we had to. Opened doors, looked around. We didn't take nothing." Brennan walked through each room slowly, photographing everything. The memorial portraits, the shoes, the immaculate furniture. He opened drawers and found them filled with personal effects: spectacles, pocket watches, wedding rings, letters tied with black ribbon. None of it made sense. "These items," Brennan said, holding up a tarnished locket, "they're keepsakes. The kind of things families bury with their dead or keep to remember them by. So why are they here?" Finch asked. "That's what I intend to find out." Back in Portland, Brennan went to the Hall of Records with the names from the photographs. It took him 2 days, but he found them all. Margaret Hollis, Samuel Kern, Dorothy Mae Fisher, Peter Ashford. All 7 names, all buried at Lone Fir Cemetery, all signed for by the same person, Harold Voss. Brennan sat back in his chair, staring at the burial ledgers. The handwriting was unmistakable, precise, elegant, eerily consistent across 4 years of records. But there was no Harold Voss in the city directory. No tax records, no property deeds under that name besides the impossible one for the land where the house stood. Land that, according to earlier surveys, had been virgin forest until sometime in 1931. Who signed off on these burials? Brennan asked the clerk, a nervous man named Milton Poole. The cemetery keeper would have witnessed them. William Dorsey, but what? Dorsey died last year. Heart attack. Right there in the cemetery office. Brennan felt something cold slide down his spine. When? Poole checked his records. January 17th, 1931. The same month the last burial signed by Harold Voss had been recorded. Brennan drove to Lone Fir Cemetery that afternoon. The new keeper, a younger man named Thomas Birch, met him at the gate. "I need to see the plots for these 7 names," Brennan said, handing him the list. Birch led him through the sprawling cemetery, checking his map at each turn. The graves were scattered, some in the pauper section, some in family plots that had been purchased decades earlier. But when they reached each location, the same impossible thing happened. The graves were empty. Not dug up, not robbed. The headstones were intact. The earth was undisturbed. But when Birch had workers dig down to check, at Brennan's insistence, they found nothing. No coffin, no remains. Just empty earth that had clearly never been disturbed. "This isn't possible," Birch whispered. "The burial records are clear. I've seen them myself. These people were interred here. Then where are they?" Brennan asked. Nobody answered. That evening, Brennan sat in his office with the case files spread across his desk. He lit a cigarette and stared at the signature that appeared again and again in the burial documents: Harold Voss. Then he noticed something: the ink. Every signature, across 4 years of documents, was written in the exact same ink, the same shade, the same consistency, as if all of them had been signed in the same sitting, with the same pen, despite being dated months and years apart. Brennan opened the city death records and cross-referenced them with the burial ledgers. He found something that made his hands start to shake. William Dorsey, the cemetery keeper who had supposedly witnessed Harold Voss's signatures, had made a report to the police in December 1928. Missing person report about a man who had been hanging around the cemetery at night, watching funerals, taking notes. The description was vague. Tall, dark coat, pale, never spoke. The report had been filed and forgotten. Nothing came of it, but at the bottom of the page, Dorsey had written a single line in his cramped handwriting. He asked me if the dead ever came back. I told him no. He smiled and said, "Not yet." Brennan stubbed out his cigarette and stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the city, the rain-slicked streets, The amber glow of street lamps, the dark hills beyond. Somewhere out there, in a house that shouldn't exist, on land that had no history, a man named Harold Voss had built something, not a home, a waiting room. To understand Harold Voss, we must go back further. Back to before the house. Before the signatures. Before the empty graves. Back to 1895. Harold Voss was born in a small logging town in northern Oregon called Timber Crest, a place that no longer exists, swallowed by forest and time. His father was a sawmill worker who died when a chain snapped and tore through his chest. Harold was 7 years old. His mother, a washerwoman named Catherine, raised him alone in a one-room shack at the edge of town. The boy was strange. Neighbors remembered him as silent, watchful. He didn't play with other children. He spent his time in the town cemetery, reading headstones, copying down names and dates in a small notebook he carried everywhere. When asked why, he said he was keeping them company. They get lonely, he told the pastor once. The dead get so lonely, Catherine worried. She took him to doctors, to priests. They said he was melancholic, overly sensitive, that he'd grow out of it. He didn't. At 16, Harold left Timber Crest and wandered through Oregon working odd jobs, farmhand, stable boy, gravedigger. Always gravedigger. He had a talent for it, a reverence. Other workers rushed through burials, eager to finish and collect their pay. Harold worked slowly, methodically. He spoke to the dead as he lowered them into the earth. Whispered promises, I won't forget you. You won't be alone. I'll keep your name. By 1920, he had drifted to Portland. He was 35 years old, gaunt, unmarried, living in a boarding house on Burnside Street. He took a job as an assistant at a funeral home, Whitaker and Sons, where he prepared bodies for burial. The owner, Ernest Whitaker, noted in his private journal that Harold was unnervingly devoted to his work. He treats each body as if it were his own family. Sometimes I catch him sitting with them after hours, just sitting there in the dark, holding their hands. It was during this time that Harold began visiting Lone Fir Cemetery regularly. William Dorsey, the cemetery keeper, later recalled that Harold would arrive every Sunday, regardless of weather, and walk among the graves for hours. Not grieving, just present. Then came 1923. The year everything changed. Harold met a woman named Claire Dennison. She was a widow. Her husband had died in the influenza pandemic of 1918. She was fragile, haunted, still wearing black 4 years after the loss. She came to Whitaker and Sons to arrange a memorial service for her husband's 5th anniversary of death. Harold helped her. They spoke for hours. She told him about her loneliness, about how the world had moved on, but she couldn't, about how she still set a place for her husband at dinner, still heard his voice at night. I understand, Harold said quietly. The dead don't leave us. We abandon them. Claire looked at him with tears in her eyes. Oh, you really believe that? I know it. They began meeting. Long walks through the cemetery. Conversations about grief, memory, the unbearable weight of letting go. Harold told her about his vision, a place where the dead wouldn't be forgotten, where their names, their belongings, their essence could be preserved. Not in cold stone, but in warmth. In life. A house, he said. A house for them, where we could keep them close. Claire smiled sadly. That's a beautiful dream. 3 weeks later, Claire Dennison died. Sleeping pills, intentional. Her suicide note was brief. I'm going to find him. Harold understands. He promised he'd keep me with him. Harold vanished the day after her funeral. Whitaker reported him missing. The police searched. Nothing. No body, no trace. It was as if Harold Voss had simply stepped out of the world, but he hadn't. He'd gone into the forest, and there, alone, driven by grief and an obsession that had finally found its purpose, he began to build. Not with blueprints, not with help. With his bare hands and a conviction that bordered on madness, he raised the walls of a house that would serve one purpose, to bring them back. Not as ghosts, not as memories, as residents. By 1928, the house was finished. And Harold Voss, now a phantom himself, began his true work, collecting the dead, one by one, signing for their burials under a name that legally existed only on paper, taking their belongings, Their shoes, their photographs bringing them home, and in that house, deep in the forest, where no living person was meant to find it. Harold waited because he believed that with every fiber of his fractured soul that if he kept their memory alive, if he preserved their essence perfectly enough, they would wake up. Detective Brennan returned to the house in the forest 1 week later. This time he came alone. He told himself it was professional thoroughness, that he needed to examine the site again, without distractions, without the crew's nervous chatter. But the truth was darker. He needed to know if what he'd felt the first time was real. That sensation of being watched, of standing in a place that existed between worlds. The house was exactly as they'd left it, untouched, waiting. Brennan walked through the rooms slowly, his flashlight cutting through the dim afternoon light, filtering through the windows. He paused at each photograph, studying the faces. Margaret Hollis, Samuel Kern, Dorothy Mae Fisher, Peter Ashford, and the 3 others whose names he now knew by heart, all dead, all buried, all gone, but were they? In the 3rd bedroom, the one with Harold Voss's photograph on the wall, Brennan noticed something he'd missed before. The nightstand drawer was slightly open, just a crack, as if someone had closed it hastily and it hadn't quite caught. He pulled it open. Inside was a journal, leather-bound, worn at the edges, filled with dense handwriting in black ink. Brennan carried it to the window, where the light was better, and began to read. The entries started in 1928, November 3rd, 1928. Margaret came home today. I prepared her room exactly as she would have wanted. Her shoes are by the bed, her shawl on the chair. I can feel her presence already. The house is less empty now. November 17th, 1928, Samuel joined us. He was alone for so long in that cold ground. Now he has company, Margaret and Samuel. The house is filling. Soon there will be enough. December 2nd, 1928. Dorsey is asking questions. He doesn't understand. No one understands. They think the dead are gone, but they're not gone. They're just waiting. Waiting for someone to remember them properly, to give them a place. The entries continued, month after month, year after year, each one documenting another homecoming, another name, another soul that Harold believed he was rescuing from the loneliness of the grave. But as Brennan read further, the tone shifted. March 15th, 1930. They're not waking up. I've done everything right. Their belongings, their photographs. I speak their names every morning. But they won't wake up. Why won't they wake up? July 22nd, 1930. Perhaps I need more. Perhaps 7 isn't enough. Perhaps the house itself needs to be more alive. I will stay here. I will become part of it. Then they'll see. Then they'll understand. January 9th, 1931. Dorsey is dead. His heart gave out. I saw it happen. He was in the cemetery office, reading the ledgers, and he just stopped, looked up at me, said, "What have you done?" And then he died. I didn't touch him. I swear I didn't touch him. But I think he saw them. I think he saw them standing behind me. The final entry was dated January 17th, 1931. They're here now, all of them. I can hear them walking in the other rooms. I can hear them breathing. They came back, not in the way I expected, not in their bodies, but in something else, something that wears their shapes. Claire was right. The dead don't come back the same, but they come back. And now I understand. This house isn't for them. It's for me. It's always been for me. Because I was the one who was dead all along. I was the one who needed to come home. The handwriting on the last line was shaky, hurried. If you're reading this, leave. Don't stay after dark. They're kind to me because I brought them here. But they'll want to keep. Brennan looked up from the journal, his hands trembling. The sun had set while he was reading. The house was dark, and from somewhere in the other rooms, from the bedrooms where the shoes waited in perfect rows, where the photographs hung on the walls, where the beds lay made and ready, came a sound, footsteps, slow, deliberate, multiple sets of them, moving through the house. Brennan's flashlight flickered once, twice, and died. In the darkness he heard a voice, dry, papery. Impossibly close. Welcome home. He ran, crashed through the front door, stumbled into the forest, didn't stop running until he reached the road where his car was parked. He drove back to Portland, with his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold the wheel. He filed his report the next morning, recommended the house be burned to the ground immediately. But when the fire crew arrived 3 days later, they found nothing. No house. No foundation. No clearing. Just forest. Old-growth trees that looked like they'd been standing undisturbed for centuries. The only thing they found was a wooden sign, half buried in moss, with letters carved deep into the grain, Voss House. All are welcome. None may leave. Detective Arthur Brennan never spoke publicly about what happened in that house. He kept the journal, locked in his desk drawer at home, never logged as evidence, never mentioned in any official report. He retired from the force 6 months later, citing health reasons. Those who knew him said he'd aged 10 years in a matter of weeks, that he'd started drinking, that he woke screaming in the night. He died in 1947, alone in his apartment, with the journal still in his possession. His daughter found it while sorting through his belongings. She read it once, burned it in the fireplace, and never spoke of it again. The land where the house supposedly stood was surveyed again in 1935 as part of a federal forestry project. The surveyors found no evidence of human habitation, no cleared land, no structural remnants. The forest was classified as old growth, untouched for at least 200 years. But the reports kept coming. Hikers claimed to see a house through the trees, always at dusk, always just out of reach. When they tried to approach, the forest seemed to shift around them, paths leading in circles, the house receding like a mirage. Lone Fir Cemetery filled in the empty graves quietly. No explanation was given. No investigation was pursued. The burial records were corrected, Harold Voss's name carefully erased, replaced with clerical errors. Bureaucratic mistakes. The 7 people whose photographs hung in that impossible house remain buried there today, or at least their names are carved in stone. Whether anything rests beneath those stones is a question no one has dared to answer. In 1952, a logging crew working east of Portland reported finding a clearing with 7 pairs of shoes, arranged in a circle around a cold fire pit. The shoes were old-fashioned, decades out of style, but in perfect condition, as if they'd been waiting. The crew left them there. By the next morning they were gone. Some stories don't end. They just stop being told. They sink into the earth like bodies in a grave, waiting for someone to remember them, waiting for someone to speak their names again. Harold Voss built a house for the dead because he couldn't bear the thought of them being forgotten. Because he believed that memory was stronger than death. That love, even twisted, obsessive, mad love, could pull souls back from the void. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps somewhere in the forests east of Portland, in a place that exists only when someone believes in it hard enough, there is still a house. Still 7 rooms. Still photographs on the walls and shoes waiting by the beds. Still a door that opens for those who can't let go. And if you walk too deep into those woods, if you're lost enough, lonely enough, grieving enough, you might see it too. A house in a clearing that shouldn't exist, with all the lights on, and someone standing in the doorway, waiting to welcome you home.